All right, would you all please rise and join me for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody. Tonight is April 29th, 2019. It's still Monday. This is our regularly scheduled town council meeting. For roll call, Mr. Roney is not able to make it this evening. He had something come up last minute. All other members of council are present, as is our first selectman. We're just going to go through some preliminary matters quickly. Our consent calendar. Any objection to me passing the consent calendar? All right, seeing none, I'll pass the consent calendar. We have communications A through N. And I'd ask that those be incorporated into our minutes. Before we get to public participation, we have our state representative, J.P. Strudinsky, who was asked to give council a brief update on the state budget situation. So without further notice, we welcome that and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to speak as part of public participation, but I have no problem going ahead. J.P. Strudinsky, 280 Shelton Road, also happen to be the state representative and a former member of this established body. So thank you all for having me. It's nice to see some friendly faces. So Senator Kevin Kelly and I had a budget forum from 6 to 7, ended up going to around 7:45. Just wanted to kind of fill you on where we are. I know the first selectman has done a good job about letting you know where we are as far as the municipal aid goes. So the process has been, the governor presented his budget middle of February. Here we are at the end of April, and we really have not seen anything happen as far as the committee process. There's been plenty of meetings and hearings and discussions. The deadline for appropriations and finance is this Friday, which means, in theory, as long as there's no stalemates or as long as there's no problems, we should receive an appropriations and revenue package for this Friday. That'll have a lot of information in it. We don't know what they're going to adjust in the governor's budget, but we highly anticipate things being changed. I did meet with Director of OPM, Melissa McCaw. I met with her and a few other concerned state reps, notably from Colchester, Trumbull, South Windsor, and the ranking member on appropriations, because of those towns getting hit so hard in their ECS funding. I asked her to explain the formula. I asked her to explain what the governor would refer to as the acceleration of the decline in revenue for ECS. So as you may remember, 2 years ago, we put together a bipartisan budget. 2 years ago, the governor proposed to zero out our ECS. We were able to restore 95% of it for that year. And we moved it to, I think, between 80-ish% in the second year, which was last year, and then it was supposed to decrease as we go out, but in a gradual way that towns could budget for and plan for, have some predictability. This year, the governor has decided to accelerate the deceleration, which is an overall ECS cut of $734,000 this year and $1.4 million next year. That on top of the teacher pension liability shift to towns, which is $315,000 next year and $651,000 next year. It shows an overall municipal decrease of $1 million next year and $2.1 million the following year. Obviously, something that we're very concerned about. I have met with both the legislative liaison for the governor, the director of legislative affairs, as well as the secretary of OPM, explained to them what our concerns are and what they believe that Monroe can afford isn't necessarily what may be the reality. So for example, the OPM secretary said by their numbers, they could see that Monroe could probably afford a 1/3 mil increase. But I explained we have a referendum. Monroe is not a wealthy town. We are not a Darien. We are not a Westport, a Weston. We are a town that has a good median income, but it's not a wealthy town, and we can't just simply increase property taxes to make up for the decrease in state funding. So that all being said, obviously there's a lot more to it than that. We should have more of an update in the next few weeks as the Appropriations Committee and Finance is done. At that point, as you know, it goes on to the next level and then eventually will be voted on by the full General Assembly. So there's a lot more work to be done, but since I was here this evening, I know some of you, if not most of you, were at the budget hearing, budget forum tonight, so thank you for attending. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to do my best to answer them.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions? Well, you're always welcome here, and we appreciate your attendance and your updates, and keep up the good work.
Have a great meeting, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public participation. Any members of the audience wish to participate in public participation? Mr. Kirsch, name and address for the record.
Steve Kirsch, 35 Applegate Lane. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to speak in favor of new business item D, the resolution regarding the reconstruction of Pepper Street, project number 84-109. I hope after your consideration and discussions tonight, a little bit of which I heard in the L&A meeting just ended, that you all will approve this and allow this project to finally move forward. This is right around the corner from me. I've been following it closely for a number of years, and I'm waiting to get this thing done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? All right, seeing nobody, I'm going to close public participation. We have no appointments this evening. We have a number of action items. First, finance, education, health, and public safety. I do not have, Mr. Ernie's not present, I don't have an update from him. Any members of his subcommittee wish to comment? Mr. Maurer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have not met since our last meeting. That being said, I wanted to provide just a slight update on finance as well as Commission on Aging.
Sure.
Finance, this council, many members were present throughout the different parts of the budget hearings for finance, but they did go through the process. Finance has put forth their budget, which will be going to referendum for the town. And I know that all of the members of finance are very much in support of that budget and are very appreciative of the collaborative effort between the selectman and his administration, this town council, and the Board of Finance and the Board of Education. That being said, there were some Board of Education unexpected expenditures that finance is looking to address how the town Board of Education and finance communicate in the future to make sure that things along those lines do not happen again, and I'm sure that will be an ongoing conversation that most likely will make its way to this chamber as well. For Commission on Aging, I just wanted to update that they were informed that unfortunately there were 0 bids when it came to the cafe and park concessions. That's for either one or both. So that was an unfortunate and disappointing thing for them. They are following that closely. I plan on keeping them informed of anything that comes past council, but they also just wanted to pass on their hopes that we as a town and as a council and as an administration can move things forward to hopefully get something in there as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Maurer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? All right, moving on to P&Z, Mr. Bells.
Park and Rec has not had a meeting since last time, and P&Z, for lack of a quorum, has pushed most of their agenda items to this Thursday night at 7 p.m. That's all I have.
Okay. L&A, Mr. Reed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we did meet tonight, as a matter of fact, and almost everything we see in the new business agenda we discussed tonight, so we'll learn how L&A thought about that.
Okay, thank you. Strategic planning, I've spoken to Mr. Kellogg just about initiatives to get going with strategic planning and get that committee ramped up now that we anticipate the budget hopefully coming to a conclusion very soon in a favorable way, and then we can focus on strategic planning and moving that agenda forward, maybe picking up maybe just some updated planning on some past open issues, including Chalk Hill, if we want to just see anything about that and move it forward. So I'll coordinate that with Mr. Kellogg, and then we'll get ready to move that forward should we need to do something short-term or look at long-term planning, which it all. EMS, Building Committee, again, nothing from Mr. Rooney. If anybody has an update.
Another meeting tomorrow night.
Perfect, thank you very much. And last but not least is your update, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pass down some written comments. Before I get to the written report, I did want to just highlight for you an item that I know you've already passed. It was on the consent calendar. It was one of the donations. It was that of an elm tree to the town of Monroe. being provided by Eastern Land Management, ELM for short. They were gracious enough to offer a tree to the town, so working with our Parks and Rec and the tree warden, who identified a location on the town green. I just want to make sure everyone's aware that we are planning a tree planting ceremony tomorrow at 1 p.m. Hopefully the weather will hold out. So if anyone would like to be there and help me thank this local business for their contribution, please feel free to attend. The other item I wanted to mention before I get to my written report is just to comment briefly in regards to the concessions. The reason why it's not in my official report is that when we did not receive any bids, I left the RFP open until a contract could be awarded, which is permitted in our process. So I'm not at liberty to get into a lot of specifics this evening, but I can share with you that I've since identified 2 viable alternatives for Wolf Park, as well as 2 separate viable alternatives for the Wilton Cafe. Regarding the Wilton Cafe, it's probably a slightly different model than we might have originally envisioned, but the intent is to at least provide some level of service so that breakfast and lunch could be served there. So as far as really the Commission on Aging, I did speak to the chairman this evening about that, and I know they're having a meeting, I believe it's Wednesday night, and while I cannot be there, I know that our Social Services, Community and Social Services Director, Amy Lakioma, will be there to give them a kind of a more complete update. And actually, one of the things I'm going to ask them to do is to look at some of the just the conceptual ideas and provide some feedback in terms of what their opinion is on those options. So that is moving forward, although not as we originally envisioned it, but we're going to keep moving forward. So on the items on my written report, we've already talked about, we've alluded to the budget process, as you all know. It now goes out to referendum. Again, Board of Finance did not have any further reductions or changes in regards to town side departmental expenditures. The projected mill rate is still 35.58, which would represent a small tax increase of just under 1%. The full document, my budget discussion, et cetera, is available on the town website as always. In regards to the DOT proposal to remove the traffic light at Bradford Drive, as I mentioned previously, the DOT did honor my request to hold a meeting. That meeting has been scheduled for Wednesday, May 29th at 7 p.m. here in Council Chambers. So we certainly would welcome participation at that discussion from DOT. The 2019 Neighborhood Assistance Act application period is open. So applications, the same process as last year. Applications will be accepted through May 15th. My office, I will be asking the council to hold a public hearing as required by the state prior to the date that we have to give our submissions to the state. After the last meeting, I wanted to kind of take a fresh look at our recycling information online. Council Member Aguilar had brought up that there's been some questions in the community about that. So we've actually consolidated everything onto one page off the Public Works site with a friendly URL of monroecta.org/recycling. We've put on there a new, the state did have an updated recycling guide of what's in and what's out. And there's also a tool that we've added on our website where you can actually type in the name of a product and it'll pop up to say whether put it in the bin, or this is household hazardous waste, wait for hazardous waste day, or this can go in the trash. So that's an interactive tool that is now available on our website. And last but not least, I wanted to just make sure the council was aware that we had a couple of resignations in the Registrar of Voters office. Jamie Campbell and Jan Larson both have resigned pursuant to state statute. The Democratic Town Committee has appointed Sue Conniff as Registrar of Voters, and Gary Zenobia has been appointed as a Deputy Registrar. There are no changes to the Republican Registrar or Deputy. I've also, also handed out is the flyer from the state on their public meeting. So I believe that is all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Ms. Aguilar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kellogg, thank you for the recycling information, that's great, and I'm gonna get it out to the public
Yep.
as soon as I can.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to make a note in our meetings, in our consent calendar, to point out also to thank you for your donation to the food pantry. I wanted to make sure everybody knew that Mr. Kellogg donated $100 to the food pantry in money that he made in
Well,
marrying someone.
Well, yeah, I mean, well,
Actual-
just as long as you mention, just to be perfectly clear, I had performed a wedding for a couple
they
in my
donated.
role as a justice of the peace. Subsequent to that, they attempted to provide me some compensation for that, which would be inappropriate for me to accept, so
Right.
they agreed to make that donation to the food pantry. So it is really on
That
behalf
was
of the
great,
couple. so.
thank you. And I also wanted to bring up, in a few meetings for the budget, Dr. Zamri brought up Chalk Hill in a couple of the meetings, and some discussions that the school has been having about bringing a regionalization program into Chalk Hill. I wanted to see if that's something we could discuss also in the future.
Well, I mean, I know Dr. Zamri did allude to regional, the potential of regional services for special education. I don't believe he specifically referred to Chalk Hill, however, that certainly is a potential opportunity there. There are many things that are still, it's a very, very early conversation, but one that I'm having eagerly, because I think something like that would be an appropriate, certainly be an appropriate use, but I think, it's far, far too early. We're still really just trying to gauge regional interest and kind of some direction on that.
Okay.
But certainly, absolutely, I mean, anything like that, if there was something more substantive to discuss, I would certainly bring it to this council.
Great, thank you very much. With the conversation about the strategic planning committee,
Yes,
I thought it
yes.
would probably come up in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you'll allow me one more,
Sure,
Mr. Chair?
please.
In regards to EDC, basically not even EDC commission, but EDC in town. Noticing a lot of businesses, I mean, I noticed Taylor Rental's gone, Julian's recently closed, all of my stuff is leaving. Is there any way we can have EDC come to a meeting to discuss EDC in town? Because it's concerning. It's concerning to me and to a lot of people about businesses that are leaving town, and don't see too many that are coming in. And I'd like to just hear an update. I tried to get to the meeting, but I wasn't able to.
Yeah, I can certainly have our Economic Development Commission chair and our members come and discuss. We actually have a lot of plans underway. There's been actually a significant amount of interest in additional development in town. As a matter of fact, at the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there was a pre-application general appointment held for a developer that I've been in conversations with, along with our town planner and our Economic Development Commission, for a fairly large, over 100,000 square foot in total retail development that would be on the former Vichet site. So there's actually a lot of interest, a lot of things that we're facing. Again, it's the changing face of retail. So there's a lot of retail establishments that are having challenges throughout the state. It's not just a Monroe issue. So part of it is continuing to attract more, different types of businesses, and we have a lot of efforts that are heading in that direction. So I can certainly have EDC come to a future meeting and kind of give you some updates.
That would be great.
We actually are in the process of finalizing at the end of May. We will be hosting a commercial brokers lunch, which will be followed by a bus tour for looking at available properties, which EDC is in the process of inventorying and kind of understanding what's out there, how's it zoned, and all that information. So
Great, okay,
so okay.
great, thank you very much.
Mr. Mauer?
Mr. Schlockman, that lunch and bus tour, depending on availability, would that be something that council members might, the bus tour aspect of it, be able to attend?
I certainly don't have any conceptual problem with that. The only thing I would ask is if, we have certainly a capacity issue, and it's kind of hard to know where we're at, and I wouldn't want to.
Certainly would
I
not
wanna
want
make
the commercial broker not to be able to go for us. I agree with
Right.
that.
But
if
for
there
that,
is,
but for that, I'd be more than happy, yeah.
thank you, Mr. Selectman.
Anybody else? All right, so we will move on. We have no unfinished business items to deal with this evening. We have 5 items of new business, starting with A, which is the resolution regarding tie and bond, the agreement for engineering services related to the MS4 annual report and screening for the fiscal year 1920. Ms. LaPellis, is there a motion?
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding the tie and bond agreement for engineering services outfall screening, MSS4 compliance fiscal year 2019-2020, and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, First Selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the engineering services outfall screening service agreement FY 2019-2020, and any associated documents by and between tie and bond for the services to support MS4 compliance.
Motion by way of resolution by Ms. LaPellis, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Reed. For discussion purposes, Mr. Kellogg, I'll turn the floor over to you. I know Mr. Schatzline's present, but I'll let you control the introduction of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this agreement is very similar in terms of the terms and conditions to the one that you saw approximately a year ago relative to the current fiscal year requirements under MS4. So it's essentially a continuation of those services for outfall screening, of basically the balance of what needs to be done. There is one more addition to the scope, which has to do with some upstream tracking of locations that were identified in the current year, but other than that, it's pretty much the same agreement that you saw last time. And with that, if there's any further questions or anything of a technical nature, certainly Mr. Schatzline is the man to answer that.
Any further discussion?
Just that it was
Mr.
to
Reed.
reach consensus to bring to council for element.
Were the fees associated with this agreement anticipated?
Those are covered within the appropriation set aside for MS4.
Anybody else? All right, seeing nothing further, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, motion carries 8-0. Moving on to item B, resolution regarding Valley EMS agreement extension. Ms. LaPellis?
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding the Valley EMS agreement extension, and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, First Selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the extension, letter of agreement, and any associated documents by and between Valley Emergency Medical Services Incorporated to renew the current agreement through June 30th, 2020.
Motion by way of resolution by Ms. LaPellis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Formicello. For discussion, again, I'll allow you to introduce this, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you again. So what's before you is the one-page letter to extend the current agreement. I've also attached the original agreement that was executed back in 2017, so you have it for reference. That agreement would end at the end of this fiscal year, but it has a provision allowing for a one-year extension based upon the parties agreeing on a rate structure. The existing agreement has 2% increases year over year. We were able to successfully negotiate another year, once again at a 2% rate, which was, I will say, was not the original offer, but we were certainly holding to that number. I have discussed this as my memo references to our with our EMS chief, our commission, and they are very strongly in favor of continuing to utilize the services of this provider.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Any
And,
further discussion?
I'm sorry, one addendum,
Yes.
that the 2% is within the budgeted the fiscal year 20 budget as well.
Mr. O'Rourke?
Yeah, I see it looks like just salaries that are justifying the 2%, or is there more?
It is, their request was based upon cost for personnel, yes, salaries are.
And at this stage, pushing back on a 2% is probably not an option.
They had a higher rate that they started with, so I was pretty clear that based on the 2% raises that we've been providing to our town staff, that that's kind of my upper limit. So,
Mr. Mauer?
Did we explore the possibility of doing it, rather than extending for 1 year, of signing a new contract for a longer period of time?
well, it certainly, I mean, the current agreement allows strictly for the 1-year extension, so that was certainly the most expeditious way to ensure that we continue to provide the service. I mean, nothing would preclude us from discussing that further, but I think prior to doing that, I'd want to probably discuss, just confirm again with the commission that they don't find any value of putting out to bid again or something like that, a more thoughtful, once that, the terms including the extension had concluded. So I think I didn't want to commit the town beyond the 1 year that was in the original agreement.
Anybody else? All right, seeing nothing further, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, that motion carries 8-0. Moving on to item C is the resolution regarding Wiffle Ball Inc. domain license agreement and the standards for certification. Mr. Phelps?
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding the Wiffle Ball Incorporated domain name license agreement and standards for certification, and move for its adoption. Resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, First Selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the domain license agreement and standards for certification and any associated documents by and between Wiffle Ball Incorporated for the Wiffle Ball Tournament.
Motion by Mr. Phelps. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mauer. For discussion, Mr. Kellogg?
Thank you again. So I just realized that there's my memo references the senior center. It should reference the food pantry. It's this is a tournament that Amy Lakioma is organizing on behalf of the food pantry. There's no cost to the town for this license. It is simply Wiffle is obviously looking to protect their domain name, their standards, and their trademarks, etc. So for us to be able to utilize their name, etc., and run this tournament, these are the documents that they require us to enter into. Ms. Lakioma is, as she was a president at LNA, I know she referenced that they have no issues being able to agree to these requirements that are here. So we're looking forward to putting on a tournament on behalf of the food pantry.
Anything further? Just for the record, it was unanimously passed in LNA for council to consider this agreement, and for the record, that was also the case with the Valley EMS agreement, although I didn't mention it in the discussion. Anything further? All right, seeing none, no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And against, motion carries 8-0. I'm just going to use my discretion to skip D and move on to E. I anticipate D being a longer discussion than E, so with that, I'll ask Ms. LaPellis for the resolution regarding the STEEP MOU agreement extension.
I will introduce the following resolution. Resolution regarding the STEEP Memorandum of Understanding Agreement revision, and move for its adoption. And I have it here. It's a long one. Whereas pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes 4-66G, the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection is authorized to extend financial assistance for public safety projects, and whereas it is desirable and in the public interest of the town of Monroe made an application to the state for $500,000 in order to undertake the Monroe Volunteer EMS Headquarters project and to execute an assistance agreement. Now therefore be it resolved by the Monroe Town Council, 1, that is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites for state assistance imposed by Connecticut General Statutes 4-66G. 2, that the filing of any application by the town of Monroe in an amount not to exceed $500,000 is hereby authorized, and that the first selectman is hereby authorized and directed to execute and file such application with the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, to provide such additional information, to execute other documents as may be required, to execute an assistance agreement with the state of Connecticut for state financial assistance, if such an agreement is offered, to execute any amendments, revisions, and revisions thereto, and to act as the authorized representative of the town of Monroe.
Motion by way of resolution by Ms. Pellis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mauer. Again, for discussion, Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you. So, as you're all aware, we have this existing steep grant and MOU in place with the state. I was concerned based on the current schedule and the progress of the EMS Building Committee while they're moving forward in a very diligent fashion. Our MOU would need to be extended. That's a process that I began, and the state has a standard extension period of 2 years, which would bring this up to 2022, which is certainly more than enough time to complete the project and all associated paperwork. In review of the original resolution, which was almost identical to the one that you're currently entertaining right now, it did name the former first selectman by name, so I was not comfortable signing the revision to the MOU without bringing it to council to make sure that this was in place. So this resolution is in the format recommended by the state, but obviously to see it names me by title and not by name, which is apparently what they're going to be doing going forward with all these grants. So this simply moves the date out 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Any further discussion? Was approved in LNA unanimously for consideration, obviously. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Against, that motion carries 8-0. Okay, on to the big item of the evening, which is item D. It's a two-part resolution regarding the reconstruction of Pepper Street State Project number 84-109. It's the first part of the resolution is regarding the project authorization letter between the City of Connecticut and the Town of Monroe. The second part is the first supplemental agreement between B&L companies and the Town of Monroe. And with that, Ms. LaPellis.
I will introduce the following resolutions. Resolutions regarding the reconstruction of Pepper Street project, project authorization letter, PAL, and BL Companies Connecticut Incorporated, first supplemental agreement, and move for their adoptions. So first, resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, the first selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the project authorization letter and any associated documents by and between the State of Connecticut Department of Transportation for State Project 4-109, reconstruction of Pepper Street design project. And then resolved that Kenneth M. Kellogg, first selectman of the Town of Monroe, is authorized to execute and deliver on behalf of the Town of Monroe the first supplemental agreement and any associated documents by and between BL Companies of Connecticut Incorporated for the consulting engineering services for the design of reconstruction of Pepper Street.
Okay, the resolutions have been read by Ms. LaPellis by way of a motion. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Aguilar? Ms. Martin, sorry. And for discussion, I know we have a presentation by Mr. Schatzline. Before we hear the presentation, do you have any opening
Yeah, I'll
comments?
just,
Mr.
if you'd allow me to, thank you. So just as a way to just introduce this, I'll just kind of recap my information you have here on my memo. This is a project that goes back to actually before 2014. This is a project for the reconstruction of Pepper Street. A long outstanding project. It's been in the design phase for several years. We were pending, we were kind of in a holding pattern for quite some time, attempting to get action by the state. In the past several months, I was successful in getting a meeting with the state and BL, along with Mr. Schatzline, Mr. Bonofsky, who was certainly involved in this, as well as Mr. Hayden, and really trying to get this project back on track. This is a project that is funded 80% through federal grants, 10% state, leaving 10% of the cost to the town. There was a bonding authorization approved in 2014 at a town meeting. It's still in full force and effect. It was actually it was based on the state's requirements at the time. The entire amount of the project was bonded, with an authorization for bonding was done for the entire amount, which is which is not necessary, as we only would be on the hook for 10%. So we have a bond authorization that is far exceeds anything required, so there's no need for further bonding authorizations. However, the overall cost of the project now has changed. That is why in the capital meetings, we discussed adding a phase 2 for Pepper Street, 100% within the grant column for a funding source. So it increases the total that we have programmed as a town for capital, but it does not increase at all our exposure to, for bonding, so to speak. There are two components of this, as we discussed earlier. There's a master municipal agreement with the state that was entered in 2016. There are project authorization letters, or PALs, that are issued pursuant to that agreement. There's one that's already been entered. There's another one that we need to discuss tonight that gets this project up to where it needs to be for the design phase. That needs to go hand in hand with a amendment to our agreement with BL, who is the company doing the design engineering services, and that is another amendment that is before you. The way they formatted that document was a little bit confusing, I would say. They were not, but it was the format they wanted. Scott, we can certainly walk you through what's actually changed there in that regard. The PAL has been was issued by the state back in March, but it really wasn't something I could bring to you until the BL agreement had come with it. So now that they're both together, we're ready to move forward. So that said, I think, I'll let Scott take it from here. I asked him to prepare a presentation that would get us where, kind of the history of this and where we are today. I know there's a lot here, and it's might be a little bit. I know it's a lot of information, but I know there's been a lot of changes on council since that initial meeting, and since that initial approval, and it was important to bring us all up to speed so we can proceed forward. So with that,
Mr. Schatzline, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Okay, if you bear with me a second, I gotta find on your computer here. Okay, again, my name is Scott Schatzline. I'm the town engineer. I'm a licensed engineer in the state of Connecticut. Would you like me to toggle this onto the monitor for the people viewing at home? Because right now it's toggled onto the commission, the council.
Sure, I think that would be wonderful. He's familiar with having
yeah, it'll record the screen as
Exactly.
opposed to the
Right,
the camera.
right. Great.
Okay, so Ken has asked me to kind of run through this. I'm going to go pretty quick through this, so if anybody wants me to slow down or if you have any questions, let me know. So as indicated, this is project Pepper Street reconstruction, project 84-109. The project location is it's really the upper portion of Pepper Street. It involves 3 different locations, the intersection of Main Street and Pepper Street, improvements there, then road improvements from Cambridge Drive down to Grant Road, and then the multi-use trail linkage, which will run from Northbrook condominiums down to Grant Road, and that's not to be confused with the separate multi-use trail project that we're working on through a lot zip project with MetroCon. That's a separate issue further south down the park. Oh, we're not moving here.
You right-clicked.
The
So
what?
you're right-clicked, so you're in the drop-down box. Nope.
Oh, someone's gonna have to help me here.
There you go.
There you go. Now you're good.
Now I'm good, okay.
I don't see any.
It's not.
There we go.
Sorry, computer problems. I don't know why it's not picking up the next slide. So I thought I'd just show you pictorially. This is the section that runs from Cambridge Drive, running south. It then picks up on the left side of the screen and runs all the way down to Grant Road. So it gives you an idea of what we'll be dealing with there. Project scope and overview. It calls for the reconstruction of 4,500 linear feet along Pepper Street. The project's going to include safety and geometric improvements, profile and sightline improvements, traffic signal capacity and safety improvements, the missing link of the trail, which runs from Grant Road to Northbrook, and that's a section which is currently on the roadway, so the goal is to pull it off the road and have a separate trail, much safer and much better use. Pavement improvement, minor widening, and culvert and hydraulic improvements pretty much over near Paquonic River. The purpose of the project really was created to address POCD goals and support the zone change to commercial use to allow for increased traffic volume and truck maneuverability. I don't know if you remember, but quite a few years ago, the town rezoned that area to a commercial use. And typically when you rezone to a commercial use, the infrastructure in the area needs to be upgraded or certainly verified that the infrastructure is adequate to support the zone that's being implemented or established. In this case, Pepper Street was not up to the standards that you need for commercial access, so this project was born, one of the reasons was born out of that necessity. It was also to address safety issues by improving the roadway sightline and stopping distances. There are, if you're familiar with it, there are a few areas where there's a vertical curve or vertical sag, where there's very poor sightline, very poor stopping distance. This will address that as well. Rebuilding the structural integrity of the road surface and base courses. This will support the heavier loads on the road and will minimize or decrease the maintenance costs and increase the overall life of the road. Adding appropriate drainage facilities will also improve the safety, flood control, and environmental conditions. And providing off-road trail linkage certainly will increase the safety and improve the quality of use of the trail, the multi-use trail itself. Existing conditions, we are dealing with urban minor arterial and urban collector. Posted speed limits are very low, they're 25 miles per hour. Average daily traffic is 4,000 vehicles per day. It currently services residential and commercial. It will continue to service that, although the north of the end will be mostly commercial. And the way it's being designed, and the goal is to have the commercial traffic go out toward the north end where it can access Main Street. If the Pepper Street Park ever gets completely finished, that may also connect through to Fan Hill Road, that area for the commercial traffic. And the Housatonic Valley Riverbed Trail will be linked together. Roadway typical section is two 12-foot lanes with 2-foot shoulders, fairly standard for that type of roadway, and the pavement is in poor condition. There was a surface course armor coat put on there in the last few years just to increase this life a little bit and get it a little bit more drivable, but but that is very temporary. Drainage, mix of closed systems and sheet flow, inadequate roadway drainage right now. The Pequannock River box culvert, it handles the FEMA floodplain and floodway. It is hydraulically inadequate per FEMA standards, and it services 0.8 square mile drainage area. There are also three roadway cross, larger roadway cross culverts. Existing conditions, wetlands were delineated in April of 2014. The mapped FEMA floodplain associated with the west branch of the Pequannock River, again, that crosses the road down near Jockey Hollow. There's no natural diverse database, map listed species, population, or habitat in the area, which is good in terms of moving the project along. It is within a public water supply watershed, but it's not within a aquifer protection area. Matter of fact, there are no aquifer protection areas listed in Monroe. Concurrent permit applications, we needed to get permits from the Army Corps of Engineers. I'll talk a little bit about that later, and Connecticut Deep permitting. Coordinated with also with the Connecticut Deep Fisheries Division and the water company. And there were direct impacts to 6 wetlands occurring at 10 impact sites throughout the project. Design elements are the multi-use trail, the box culvert for the river, the Pepper Street profile improvements, that's horizontal but mostly vertical, the signalized intersection of Pepper Street and Main Street, pavement reconstruction, guardrail will increase the safety and usability of that intersection, and various drainage improvements. Under key issues, I've divided this out into different categories. So we start out with geometry. The horizontal alignment improvements are minor. So there's basically the widening is more to make the road uniform. Turn this off. The vertical alignment, as I said, is fairly significant. We're talking a little bit over 3 feet, almost 4 feet, to cut down the crest and add a little bit to sag curves, and that will make the drivability much better, and it will make the sight lines much better. Addition of a dedicated left turn lane, what we did was we added a left turn lane from Pepper Street out onto Main Street, and that will prevent the stacking that goes way back into Pepper Street, and it will also allow for shifting the exit lanes over so we could widen the entrance lane, so when a truck turns into Pepper Street, mainly from coming from a southbound direction, there'll be enough room for the truck to swing into the road. And those are good improvements to help with access for commercial and hopefully help kind of spur some more development in the area. Safety, the sight line we talked about, and the separation of the roadway and the trail, another very important element for safety purposes, especially if you're dealing with commercial traffic. And we also looked at adding guide rail where appropriate. Under structures and utilities, we're looking at pavement composition, existing pavement failures, and the way we address that is with full depth reconstruction. This is so it will support the heavy truck traffic without falling apart as quickly. Right-of-way impacts, 25 properties were impacted. There were partial takes, there were easements, and there were construction rights. That work has already been completed, or the acquisitions that happened, the state of Connecticut coordinated that. Utility impacts, 10 utility pole relocations. There are some gas and water line relocations. We were lucky in that years ago when they put the water main in, they anticipated that the road would be lowered to fix the sight line, so that was minimized in that respect. relocation or adjustments at culvert and drainage conflicts that we could not avoid. We did go through a process where we tried to redesign and find ways to avoid conflicts, but there are some that we had to address. Under drainage and erosion sedimentation control, there are 38 new catch basins, so it really is bringing the road up to standard, putting curbing in, catch basins, culvert replacement. We're going to extend the culvert, rebuild the culvert for the Paquonic River and extend it by 30 feet. By doing that, it can also accommodate the new trail that will go over the culvert off the road, increasing the size of 5x12 box culvert. E&S control, the typical, silt fence and hay bales. We're adding riprap splash pads at outlets and 4-foot sumps at catch basins. We were unable to provide other required and requested improvements for biofiltration, et cetera, which I'll go into in a little bit when we get to Army Corps. This is a rendering of the box culvert. You'll see that this is on the west side of Pepper Street, looking at Pepper Street, and the trail will cross over the box culvert. On the other side of that fence will be the road. Traffic, partial detour during construction. There's 2 reasons for the detour. One is, obviously, the culvert's going to cross the whole road, so we're going to have to do it in stages. And we're looking at alternating one-way traffic, and then we're also looking at alternating one-way traffic and partial detour when the road excavation is taking place, because it'll be significant. But we are looking at maintaining emergency services at all times. Accident experience. Accidents aren't really that high, but it's more about usability. But there were 10 accidents 2007 through 2012, and that information did help with the initial application process. Permits and environmental. There were local inland wetlands permit. Their Army Corps 404 application and permit. Army Corps wanted biofiltration and various environmental improvements. We were unable to provide those within the right-of-way and land that we had, and so they required that we provide a fee in lieu of services. So I'll get to that a little bit later as well. FMNC is a federal floodplain management certificate. It's not required because we're less than 1 square mile, and we are going to need a stormwater general permit, which goes with anything of this size property. Hazardous contaminating materials. There's 12 high-risk parcels that are highlighted, 12 moderate-risk parcels. We went through a 210 and a 310 study, which highlighted those parcels. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that the 310 was subsequent to the, first you do a 210, and then if you find something, it moves on to a 310. You'll see that's one of the extra items. And that, however, highlighted that we can leave some of that contamination in place with the project, but unfortunately, we're going to have a surplus of material, so we will have to take away some of that material. History of wildlife, there was no phase 1 archaeological resources found, so that's a good thing, and there are no endangered species. Recreation, again, it provides for the multi-use trail. We're looking at putting an 11-foot wide multi-use trail. The trail is 2,000 feet from Grant Road to the existing trail in the north end of Northbrook. We're eliminating the need for trail users to be on Pepper Street, which is huge. 4-inch stone dust on 6-inch base. We're looking at a green belt between the trail and the street. Not a big green belt, but we're hoping to put some landscaping in there. There'll also be some guide rail and fencing, and along those lines. Project schedule, as Ken had indicated, this project started in 2014, and it is, here we are in 2019. The right-of-way phase, which took a while, the state coordinated, that is complete at this point. We've paid and procured the land that we needed and all the other rights. The permitting phase is completed at this point as well, both state and local. We're looking to advertise for construction in early summer of 2019 and hoping the construction phase would be from 1920 to 2021. So 2 full construction seasons are anticipated for the work. Funding and cost sharing, as Ken had indicated, federal 80, state 10, and town 10%. The total project cost at this point in time is $7,290,960, give or take a little bit. The cost breakdown is the design phase, which includes the right-of-way permitting and the state oversight, is $874,000. The construction phase, including inspection and oversight, is $5,949,960, and those 2 red items are highlighted or asterisk for a purpose of they're not hard numbers. They will change a little bit, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. Breakdown is $476,000 is what right-of-way ended up coming out to, which is actually a decrease from what was originally estimated. Speaking of what was originally estimated, this project was funded in June of 2012. It's called a scope confirmation meeting. And during that meeting, we meet with the state and come up with an estimate of what the project is going to cost. At that point in time, when this project was initiated, those were the estimated costs: $536 for design, construction the $3,645,000, right away $580, which went down to $430, and the total was $4,761,000. So that it gets compared with these numbers here that I previously gave you. Original state. What happened was when we started this project, the process was to have an agreement, direct agreement with the town. So we entered into an agreement with the state of Connecticut for design of $536,000, and it was based on an estimate. And this is very typical to the process. As we go through the design process, then things are uncovered as far as what the project will actually entail, what we have to deal with as inspection is done and exploration is done and design, preliminary design. And so later, afterward, what happened was the state created a new system to track projects and to deal with projects. So instead of having individual contracts throughout the state that are very time consuming, they went to the statewide master municipal agreement in 2016. So what happened was they then issued a PAL, Project Authorization Letter #1, which brought us into that new process. So they scrapped the agreement that we initially had with them, and they put us on the master municipal agreement with the PAL, which is authorizing the project through that process. So that's what the PAL 1 was for. The construction cost of $5,762,900 was based on the final updated design estimates. So when they went through the design and they had a much better handle on what the project would cost, they did an updated estimate, and that's where we started with PAL #1. We're now at PAL #2, which is meant to adjust the consultant contract amount and the added extra engineering that came about as part of the regulatory process and the design process that we went through, and to add additional DOT services, which also were kind of a domino effect from the final design and from the extras that were added. So the design cost, that brought the design costs up to $874,000. As I said, the right-of-way costs went from an actual, or they got reduced by $104,000 through the negotiation process. So one thing that did go down was the right-of-way. At the moment, and this is why I redlined this, so that these previous numbers here are redlined to coincide with that, is that the next thing that's going to happen after tonight, after we bid the project, probably about a month from now, a month and a half from now, the design will get finished and we'll put it out to bid. Once it goes out to bid, then the state goes through a process where obviously we'll know the real number for construction, and that could come in less. I think the state estimates very high, so I'm hoping that the bid will come in lower, but I don't know. So when the bids come in, PAL 3 is going to adjust the, well, first they're going to adjust to the current number, this 874 that I told you about. There are numbers that they do know about, which is 178,000, and that is to add design services during construction, the fee that we owe the Army Corps of Engineers, and those are things that were finalized, and this is the point in the project where those corrections in the numbers are supposed to happen. And then, so what will happen with these numbers I'm indicating here is that they'll then get adjusted for the inspection costs per the inspection services that we're currently negotiating with them, with BL, and they'll get adjusted for the bid prices that actually come in for the construction. So those two numbers could be lower, or they could be higher, so we don't know at this point. Reimbursement process is the town pays the total invoice expense and submits to the state for reimbursement, with the exception of right-of-way. Right-of-way is something that the state of Connecticut paid for directly. So they sent us a bill for our 10%, but they paid those costs directly. Everything else gets paid through the town, and the turnaround for reimbursement is approximately 2 months. Invoices and reimbursements are on a monthly cycle, so when the construction bid kicks in, those will be moving along pretty quickly. Town expenses, currently the town cost, which is 10% of the project cost, is going to be $729,000, roughly $730,000. And that number will get adjusted, as I said, once we know what the bid and the inspection services cost. The current cost of all work completed to date, all the work completed to date is equaling $1,235,685. So we are currently into the project to that amount. The pending tasks, as I indicated, are to complete the design, and that's one of the reasons why you're looking at amending the consultant agreement tonight, so that the extra work that goes with that, the extra work is needed in order for them to finish the plans and do the bid, so we can get out the bid. Complete the design, hopefully month and a half. Agreement for inspection services. We are currently in negotiation for that. The inspection service agreement has been sent to the state of Connecticut. They are reviewing it, and as soon as they finish reviewing it and send it back, I'll have a better handle on that. Bid construction, again, once we bid it, we'll know. The PAL adjustment is the PAL number 3 that I talked about, to adjust it for that inspection and construction. Then we're looking at completing the construction, which will take 2 construction seasons. And then after that, we're looking at a period of time for records and audit and things like that. So with that, does anybody have any questions?
Questions, Mr. Reed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a statement and a couple of questions. Thanks for that. This was very concise and informative, I thought, especially since this has started years ago, right? So the one thing I would like to pull out that we did discuss in LNA, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of council, is that I think the first selectman and Scott have a much better bearing on this time around. This wouldn't have come out in Scott's presentation, but first selectman's even had a meeting directly with the state, brought them in face to face. They're committed to keeping a cadence like that, maybe not face to face, but certainly I have no doubt Mr. Kellogg's gonna watch the state more carefully than they're gonna watch him probably. So I think that's a good thing because there was some lost logistics, I think, going back to 2016 and 2017. That was my statement. The question I had was the 878. Was that, I just didn't follow and it was me. Was that in addition to
The
that?
874?
874.
874 is the design cost. It was, when the design was originally, when we signed the initial contract, it was $536,000. When we did the PAL #1 and we, or the state, adjusted that figure to go from an estimate to an actual number, given what was the design at that point, it went up to $753,000 some odd dollars. And then from the 753, which was that contract amount, it now, per the PAL, which is tonight,
Sure.
is going to 874. And that's for the extra work that's added.
That is, for me, well explained. The points I'd like to kind of glean out. So 2012, this starts, right? There's a list of codes at DEEP, or DEP at the time. There's codes for us. This is a town road. Do you see, and not that you're the purveyor of every state code and regulation, but do you see a tremendous amount of change at the state, especially since what the state's doing with drainage? And I know you brought up drainage, but are we accommodating for all that? Is that, there has been a tremendous amount of change at the state when it comes to construction. Are
And
we
how
impacted
they
by
deal
that
with
in
things, you
the
mean?
9 or the 7 years this has been going on?
You mean in how they deal with these projects?
Well, not only how they deal with the project, but we obviously planned against a certain set of codes and policies at the time, which was 2012.
Yeah.
It's now 2019, and there's just, even we on council have faced a number of decisions we've had to make because of state regulations, especially through DEEP. Good or bad, do we see changes?
There definitely are changes in the project that are due to changing regulations.
And we're accommodating for them in this climate?
Yes, matter of
Okay.
fact, that is what some of this, it wants to update here. That's what some of the increase in these extra work items are. BL had to go back and redesign to accommodate some of those changes. For instance, the guide rail used to be, there was a certain set of standards, and now they use what's called MASH standards. It's a different way where they actually design the guide rail now to crumple more than they used to. So it's a different standard. They had to go back and change it. And then once you change one thing, it changes, it's like the domino effect.
Yeah. And if we start this year, and it'll go through 2 construction seasons we're also in, DEEP's pretty forward projecting and communicative of their changes, as well as DOT. We'll stay on top of those. We have a consultancy group that will
Yeah,
keep on
their
top of that.
DOT is very much involved in
Yeah.
this project.
Good.
Everything goes, gets signed and reviewed, by the town. Then we have to send it to the state. They sign it before it can get reimbursed and
Yeah.
before we get authorization to do any part of the project.
It's just a very, and I know you know this, it's a very different project than 25 and 111, culverts and bridges. This is our road.
This is our road, yeah.
So, the state gets to do what they do on their roads, and they follow along, and they're all plugged into it themselves. We just want to make sure there is, not even theoretically, realistically, there is a separation of, quite literally, state and local. So we just want to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place that let us stay on top of those policies.
Yeah, there's a lot of federal standards too, because it's
Yeah.
federal money.
Good.
Anybody else?
No, thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Rourke.
So 2012, when this first came up, we were looking at 4,761 and change, and now we're up to 7,290. million and change. So that's over the last 7 years, 53% increase over what we were originally talking about 7 years ago, or a little over 7.5% per year that this budget has grown for the construction costs of the project. I don't know, I look at this and, again, I'm astounded by the amount of increase over a short period of time. I would have loved to have gotten 7.5% return on my investments or my IRA or savings account, but that certainly wasn't the case. And inflation, on a year-to-year basis, was far less than half of this. The thing that really bothers me about this is, we got a lot of things coming up in this town, some of them that we see right in front of us, some of them that are going to be opening up like trapdoors in front of us, probably during this election cycle and during the budget cycle of the state. I'm looking at that huge number, and boy, if that was a number that was tossed out back in 2012, I'm not sure we'd be here sitting here having this conversation right now. It's a big number.
Anybody else?
Quick question. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop.
No, go ahead, Sean.
Just hypothetically, if we did nothing and we just paved, and we paved Pepper Street again, of course, it would not be up to the standards that we're talking about. Just the current state of that road, basically just past, going towards 25, past the condominiums, where it starts to degrade and all of that. That section of road, if we threw down pavement, what would we be looking at for the cost of that stretch of road to be repaved at our cost at 100%?
I don't have that number for you, but I can tell you it would be much, much, much less. However, one thing to remember, and that's why I went through the items that were driving this project in the first place. And remember that this is a regional roadway. Pepper Street handles traffic from Main Street. As you know, when things are going on Main Street, there's a lot of traffic on that. And the regional council, who handles a lot of, and funnels a lot of the funding to the town, they want to see, they need to see that the towns are improving the regionally used roadways through a process. So when these kinds of projects become eligible, they put out requests to the participating towns, and they're looking for projects from the towns to do in their town to address these issues. And if the towns don't ever submit for those projects and don't ever do them, what happens is that they eventually get dropped, and the state doesn't look to do those types of programs. So when you, I'm not saying that this is, in my opinion, very much needed, but the problem with it is this is more of a planning. And planning is long range. People can't really grab hold of it and see it right away. It's something that helps in the future. And in this case, it's helping because you rezoned it to commercial. And hopefully, having this type of infrastructure will help that area do well and bring in more business, and is your opportunity to increase your tax base and to get funding for other projects in the future.
How did we lose 7 years from when this little seed was planted and watered and expected to sprout quite a while ago? I mean, again, I was here when it first came up, and I'm sure a number of people were here, and we were all for it. It all seemed to make sense at that time. 7 years later, nothing's happened, and now we're looking at, 53% more to do it,
Is it a different project?
It's just, no, it's the same project.
Well, remember too that, and one thing
That's what's
is
bugging me.
that even if we weren't looking at the time, and the time lapse is big.
It's ridiculous.
But if you weren't looking at that, remember that this increase in cost is not just due to the time element. That's only one part of it. It's the process. Now, granted, I think when they did these initial estimates for the project, they start with the town generates the number. It goes through the council who adjusts it. It goes through the state of Connecticut. It went back and forth. They increased it. But as you can see, the numbers are low, and it's the process. When you go through the process, you learn how involved the project is, and then the numbers are increased to match the project. So a lot of this increase you're looking at would have happened anyway, regardless of the time element. The timing is only, I'd say, maybe a third of that increase. The other 2/3 are just normal process. Any large project you have like this will go through that process, and 9 times out of 10, it is an increase, definite increase. And one thing I'm learning from this is that, you know, on these projects, they're so, I remember working on some bridge projects years ago that were over 10 years in the making. And that was typical. And a lot of people have trouble with it. Like, why does it take 10 years? It's just that there's so much goes into it. And different agencies and the feds and red tape. So this adjustment process is the way that they do it, and it's not just because of the time that it went up. Unfortunately, it is hard to, it is a jump. I mean,
If I'm having some resistance to this, who was originally in favor of this, I give this a picture of the next town meeting on this.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kellogg?
Thank you. I just wanted to, thanks Scott again for going through this. I just wanted to comment that, first of all, this change in this project is, the magnitude is not lost on me. It's something I was very frustrated when I first learned of it as well. I think the biggest challenge, I mean, I guess I was going to reiterate that some of this is due to timing, some of this is due to change in scope. What would seem to me is that it originally should have been, typically there would be a contingency factor that would be part of the initial estimate. It seems like someone in the state did a very poor job in determining what that contingency amount should have been, because there's clearly, 50% increase is not something to sneeze at. The biggest challenge I have with this at this point, as I put all this together, is we are in a kind of we're in a position as a town that is as concerning as this is. If you look at the alternatives, we're currently faced with a project that we basically we have an authorization to bond $5 million on. The town really only would be initially bonding, the intent would have been the town would have bonded $500,000, $500,000, which would have been 10% of the original project. That has now grown to $750,000. So we're looking at a $250,000 increase on the town side from the 500 to the 750, which again, 50% is not insignificant over this time period. The challenge, however, is that we're not left with much alternatives, because to walk away from this project currently, the town would be on the hook for 100% of everything that's already been done, that the town has already authorized the work to have been done through the design phase, which is $1.2 million. So if we walk away right now, we spend $1.2 million and we get nothing for it, and we still have to pave the road on our own dime. If we proceed with this, yes, we're talking about currently a $750,000 expenditure that we do have a bond authorization for. It is more than we anticipated, but we get a substantial amount of work completed, and it does support the economic development of that industrial park. It makes substantial safety improvements. So the cost increases are now lost on me. I'm very frustrated. I'm extremely upset with the logistics that's occurred over the last, I mean, I can only control what I had when I, when I came in, and I'm not faulting, we walked into kind of the state being pretty stagnant on this whole thing when I took office, and it's taken this long to get them to come around and actually move forward and figure out where we're going from here. So I just wanted to provide that kind of my sense at this point of the situation that we're currently in. And as frustrated as I am, and as much as I am upset at the increase that this represents, I think we have a choice that between two alternatives, and one is pretty significant that doesn't benefit the town at all at the end of the day.
Well, Mr. First Selectman, I really appreciate that further explanation, because that is huge. That's a huge part of this explanation, because $1.2 million that we're on the hook for if we drop this, I mean, that completely changes the whole dynamic and how I started to look at this, just from the increase from 7 years ago when we looked at it. So dropping 1.2 million, or dropping this project by being a little ticked, well, more than a little ticked off, about 53% increase, that certainly changes the whole dynamic of the thought here. Cellular.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually was gonna talk about what we were on the hook, because we discussed that in LNA. Mr. Schatzline brought that up in LNA, that we'd be on the hook for 1.2 million versus the 729. I actually wanted to talk about what you talked about on one of your slides. Just a kind of a contradicting, that it could have other things to do than time, because actually one of your slides says it could go down. The total cost could go down, could be 5 million.
That's what it was originally.
It's right here, the cost could go down with PAL 3. That's the next one that's
Right.
gonna come to you.
Right. So, you can never tell what it's gonna be, what constitutes the price. 'Cause
And that has a lot to do with when it's bid, who's doing the work and who needs work, the economy, and
Right.
things like that.
Understood. I also, actually, never mind. I take that back.
Mr. Mauer?
Sorry.
I agree that the introduction of what we're on a hook completely changes the discussion. And to me, that makes this a no-brainer that we go forward. Whether I agree with the other aspects or not, that it's almost a moot point. The one thing I do want to bring up, I only had a very cursory look at the master service agreement because it is extremely extensive and we didn't have it for that long. And I'm curious, I'm happy to go and do a much more in-depth look, but I'm curious if anybody in the room happens to know, is there any terms within that master service agreement for undue delay that could cause for us to have a claim for some of that added cost based off of where that undue delay was caused, being outside of the town's control? Do we know if that exists, or?
I know Mr. Attorney Hayden did look at.
Talking about suing the state of Connecticut as part of the,
I'm not talking about suing the state of Connecticut, I'm talking about collecting what would be due to us underneath the contract.
There's, the short answer to that is no.
well, we're not collecting what's due, just so you understand.
Well,
It's a different,
being
the funding
reimbursed.
structure has changed, so.
Right, but if part of that funding structure was changed based to an undue delay, and there was undue delay built within the contract, then it would be being reimbursed for something that was under the contract and anticipated.
You don't think there's a force majeure clause in the contract?
I'm sure there is, but then we have to find out whether, these are all terms of like I said, I had a very cursory review of this. I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just curious as to whether we have looked at those
I just know
options.
you're a lawyer, so that's why I had to, you know that catch-all, it's somewhere in there.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
having dealt with force majeure, it's a pretty high standard too.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
Very high
it's a
standard.
pretty
It's on the
general
way to
standard.
Sanders
Ms. Aguilar, go ahead.
Can I ask one more question? Mr. Kellogg and Mr. Shaw.
Can I get an answer
Oh,
that
sure.
was being provided
I
first?
think you gave you an answer, but go ahead, you can repeat your answer.
There's no provision in here for us to find money damages relief for any delay that we've experienced as a result of what's been going on to date. Unfortunately, it's not gonna, it doesn't work out that way. There is not one, and we're not gonna be able to find one. We're not gonna be able to negotiate one into it.
Oh, certainly not.
I'd love to, but we're not gonna be able to.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make one, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, please.
Just one housekeeping note. There is a date on the PAL.
Yes.
There was a deadline on it of there was a return date by April 26th. I just want to be clear for the record. Scott, did you, that's not a terminal date. We're not going to lose because that date has come and gone.
That's correct. In our meeting that we had with the state, we asked that question, and they said that it was just a target date, as long as we get the PAL back to them, that they're well aware of our schedule, they're aware of our meeting tonight, actually.
And they are agreeable to us crossing that date off and indicating
putting the date that we sign.
where the first selectman will sign. He can amend it to accurately reflect the date on which he signs.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That was my next question.
Anybody else? Ms. Aguilar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to know if it's possible in the next year or two, if we can get quarterly updates maybe from you about this, just so that this doesn't happen again in the next 2 years, so that we know that it's rolling, and not that I don't trust you, but
Yeah, actually, what'll happen is, once it's bid, it's locked in at that point. It's all solid numbers.
okay.
The only number that wouldn't be solid is if there is something that happens during construction, if they're digging and they find some archaeological site or something, then there'll be a change order, and the project would have to go up by that amount.
Okay.
I will say for the record, that this hasn't been dormant since 14. We have received, as a council, material periodic updates. I have to admit, Mr. Schatzline has kept us informed in a number of ways, not only through subcommittees, L&A, through this council, through the selectman's office, and ancillarily, it does come up when we have Mr. Schatzline. At times, we who are familiar with these projects sometimes ask him about these projects. So I have to admit that we have been informed probably more than, we even need to have been, there was a lot of period of we don't know, we're waiting on the state. So I do
That's
admit
what I
that
remember.
many members of council have
Anytime you need
updates.
something, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Provide.
Thank you.
I have a question, it's just piqued my curiosity. A new site like Karuba over there,
Yes.
that building, which it's right in the middle of this project. When P&Z approves something like that, and you look at that, do you presume, is it impossible for you to presume that a project like this, it's hypothetical still at that point? Do you take into consideration, I guess, the new proposed sight lines of that roadway and make sure that approval takes that into consideration?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. What we did was I provided the plan to the engineer that did that.
Okay.
And an example across the street, the new Grasso facility, they actually provided a plan that we're just signing off on now, which has different sight lines shown on it.
Okay.
So I made them actually move their driveway further to the north so that when they build, if they build it before we build this, the sight line won't be great, and it'll be better once the road is built. But I look at, how far do they have to go back onto their property to make it work? But yes, it's incorporated.
So then the answer to my question is going to be obvious in that those developers are aware of this project for certain before, as they come into the town and make their applications.
Yes, yes, because in some cases, like the one I just said, the Grasso, their driveway sight line doesn't quite meet the standard. But I know that it's going to be, they incorporated this project into it, so it will when the project gets done. But right now, it'll be the best it could be without it.
Have you had those local businesses reach out to you for updates on the status of this? Because I'm assuming there probably is concern with disruption to their business based upon the commencement of the construction, if they did know about it. I'm curious
I
about
gotta
that.
tell you, it's very little.
Really?
Maybe one, I think one business contacted us asking like, what's going on?
Right.
Very little. I think most of them that had the most impact, they were tuned in with the takings.
Right.
So that was big to them once they went through the taking and they found out more information about it directly from the state.
Mr. Kellogg, is there something that your office does to inform those businesses that are impacted by this, whether it's required or not?
So-
Just out of curiosity.
What we've been doing typically, and these have been for the state projects, is there's a process where they actually have the project manager actually would visit those local businesses and make sure they're informed when it comes to detours and things like that. This is a slightly different effort since it's a town road, so I'm not sure how we'd have to tweak that, but we would certainly follow a similar program. where
But
they
that's
would-
your intention.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Anything further?
No.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Schatzline, thank you, Mr. Kellogg. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? I'm sorry, did you have something to say?
I would like to amend the motion. I move to amend the motion to allow for the edit by the selectmen as to the date on the PAL, so that, so pending the change of the date on the PAL, allowing for signature.
Okay, I'm not sure it's necessary, but I appreciate your,
We did, can I make a comment?
Sure.
We did bring that up in LNA, and you had do you wanna?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so we brought that up, we challenged that in LNA. It's, the state understands that. We could go forward with this, and then they'll review the contract.
but I think what Mr. Mauer is saying is we're approving, the motion technically is approving the document as presented, so hyper-technically, if we're gonna change that, I think it's an appropriate,
But what would we change it to?
whatever the date it's executed, so it's not gonna be the date. that-
Okay, so we won't know.
As the town attorney pointed, so,
Right.
motion by Mr. Mauer.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Reed. Any further discussion that we've already kind of had? No? All right. All those in favor of the amendment to the motion? All right, so it carries 8-0. Now we have the amended motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? No, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And motion carries 8-0. That concludes our business this evening. Actually, it does not. Second public participation. Anybody still wait for second public participation? All right, I see none.
I'm barely here.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Mauer,
Second.
second by Mr. Reed. All those in favor? Thank you.
Jason.